Imagine this. You're in a courthouse, a tense atmosphere hanging in the air, and suddenly, a woman gets pepper sprayed in the middle of a heated confrontation. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But that's exactly what happened when a woman, clearly frustrated with the situation, pulled out pepper spray and aimed it at a fellow courtroom attendee. But here's the twist. The woman she sprayed wasn't just any random person. She was the judge. Yes, you heard that right. What happens next is jaw-dropping and full of unexpected turns. How does the judge react? What consequences await the woman who made this outrageous move? Stick around to see what unfolds, because you won't believe how this story ends. Stay tuned to witness a shocking turn of events that will leave you questioning how far people will go in the heat of the moment. The courthouse was buzzing with tension that day, as a contentious case had people on edge. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, but tempers were flaring and emotions were running high. The woman who sprayed the pepper spray, later identified as a frustrated litigant, had already been arguing with others in the room for some time. She was visibly upset, struggling to get her point across, but when her irritation reached a boiling point, she snapped. Without warning, she pulled out the canister and aimed it directly at the person sitting across from her. What she didn't know, however, was that the woman she'd just assaulted wasn't some random bystander. She was the judge presiding over the case. The shock in the room was palpable as everyone froze, unsure of what to do next. Would the courtroom descend into chaos, or would there be some kind of justice served in this unbelievable moment? The courtroom fell eerily silent as the woman's hand trembled, still holding the pepper spray canister. Her face was a mix of disbelief and satisfaction, as if she had just taken control of a situation that had been spiraling out of her hands for days. But in that split second, reality hit her. She had just sprayed a judge, a figure of authority she had no business challenging. The gasping onlookers exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how this would play out. From the judge's perspective, everything seemed to move in slow motion. As the spray hit her face, her vision blurred and a burning sensation overwhelmed her senses. But beneath the pain was something else, an intense clarity. This wasn't just an attack on her. It was an attack on the law itself, on the very system that had put her in this position of power. She could feel the weight of the moment, the responsibility pressing down harder than ever before. The bailiff, standing nearby, rushed to her side, but even he seemed frozen in uncertainty. He knew the protocols, but this situation was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Was the woman's assault intentional? Was she simply overwhelmed by the case or something personal? Whatever the reason, the moment had shifted everything in that room. The courtroom was no longer a place of impartial judgment. It had become a battlefield. Meanwhile, the defendant, a man accused of fraud, watched the chaos unfold with a strange mix of fear and fascination. He had never imagined his trial would turn into such a spectacle. And yet, he knew one thing for sure. If the judge didn't regain control soon, his fate, and everyone else's, would be in the hands of someone else. The power struggle was just beginning, and no one could predict where it would lead. The judge staggered backward, clutching the edge of the bench to steady herself as the sting of the pepper spray began to take its toll. The room, still frozen in shock, seemed to hold its breath. A few murmurs began to spread through the crowd, but no one dared to move or speak too loudly. The bailiff, his hands trembling as he tried to assess the situation, finally barked out an order. "Get her some water, now." But the words felt hollow. No one knew what would happen next. From where she stood, the woman who'd sprayed the judge began to realize the gravity of her actions. Her earlier anger and frustration melted into fear, but there was no turning back. The judge had been a figure of authority, but now, as she struggled to regain control, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting to see if she would crack under the pressure or stand her ground. But it wasn't just the woman who'd sprayed her who was feeling the heat. The defendant, sitting silently, started to fidget nervously in his seat. His case, once at the center of attention, was now a distant afterthought. The courtroom was no longer a place for legal discourse. It had become a chaotic arena where the stakes had escalated in ways no one could have predicted. Through the haze in her eyes, the judge focused on one thing: regaining control. She could hear voices whispering, wondering if they should call the police, or if this would be the moment her authority crumbled. But deep down, she knew the courtroom needed her to act decisively. The question was, could she? Outside, the courthouse doors were locked, and rumors began to spread quickly. Reporters outside scrambled to get information, sensing a story bigger than any trial. Yet, in the courtroom, it was the quiet uncertainty that made the tension unbearable. Would the judge press charges? Would the woman who'd attacked her face serious consequences? Would the trial even continue? No one could answer those questions yet, but the pressure was mounting, and soon, someone would have to make a choice that would change everything. As the judge slowly regained her composure, her face still burning from the pepper spray, something unexpected happened. A loud crash echoed through the courtroom, followed by the sound of running footsteps. The door to the chambers swung open, and in rushed a group of men, dressed in plain clothes, but their badges visible. It was the prosecutor's team, but they weren't there for any typical legal procedures. They were there with one clear purpose: to take control of the courtroom. The tension in the room shot up instantly. The bailiff, still reeling from the chaos, stood frozen as the prosecutor's team moved toward the front, their eyes locked on the judge. At first, it seemed like they were there to offer assistance, to help the judge regain control of the situation. But then, the lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman with a stern expression, did the unthinkable. She turned to the defendant's lawyer and whispered something that made the attorney's face go pale. The lawyer nodded slowly, then stood up and called out, "We need to halt the trial immediately." Before anyone could react, the door to the courtroom flung open again. Another figure, one the judge recognized immediately, entered. It was the sheriff, his stern face telling a story of its own. Behind him were several officers, all armed with arrest warrants. "Everyone stand down," he commanded. "We've just discovered the real criminals behind this scheme." The prosecutor's smug expression faltered as the sheriff handed over a set of documents that revealed shocking evidence: bribery, falsified testimony, and a conspiracy designed to take down the judge and manipulate the case for profit. The prosecutor, once so confident, now found herself on the receiving end of the law. The courtroom fell into stunned silence once again, but this time it was not out of fear or confusion. It was out of awe at the truth that had finally been revealed. As the sheriff made arrests, the room slowly started to realize the extent of the corruption they had all unknowingly been a part of. The judge, though battered and bruised from the attack and the ordeal, had emerged as the one who had uncovered it all. But just when it seemed like the case was finally resolved, a chilling voice came from the back of the room. "You think it's over?" The voice was familiar, almost too familiar. The audience turned, and there, standing in the shadows, was another figure. The one person who had been pulling strings from behind the scenes, someone who had remained hidden until now. The real mastermind was still out there, and this wasn't over. The room tensed as the figure in the back stepped into the light, revealing a face that shocked everyone: the district attorney, someone who had been in the courtroom the entire time. The twist was more than anyone could have imagined. But before he could say another word,